It can be quite daunting to give a presentation in front of people, getting your message across, making sense. And this presentation is going to guide you through several aspects of making a presentation, not just the actual talking part, but it's going to deal with other parts of it as well. So hopefully this presentation will be useful to you in several ways. And obviously this is in the form of a presentation, so you can evaluate whether or not I follow the rules or guidance that I am offering you. Okay, let's get started. So initially we're going to talk about what a presentation is, then how to structure it, how to make sure it makes sense, and then to focus in how to actually make that, how to make and give that presentation, and how that can be done as effectively as possible. So, presentation, it's important to understand, is just an oral and possibly visual. If you do a PowerPoint as well, you don't always do a PowerPoint with presentations, but that's, let's take this presentation as offering advice for a singular oral presentation with no visuals and a presentation that may have a PowerPoint alongside it. And as it says here, it's an oral and visual version of your report. If you're doing one, what it perhaps could say is it's an oral and visual version of your academic understanding rather than a written version. That's the difference. A written version is not the same as an oral and visual presentation. So what are the differences? To my mind, if you're making a presentation, the differences come in the form of the language you use, the depth of content that you may go into, and if you're doing a PowerPoint, the visual content that you add to it. So when it comes to language, the difference would be that language is not going to be the same in the spoken version than in the written version. I would definitely not recommend that you read out a report or you read out an essay. That a presentation like this, the language can change because it's spoken, and it tends to. So the form of language you use would be less formal. Also, the depth that you go into, you may not be able to reflect, depending on the time you have to present, the same depth that you might be able to go into in a full essay or report. If you give that it's about 1,000 words to do, say, 5 minutes of presentation, whether you can have that same depth of content and analysis that you have in a written form may be affected by the time you have. So that's something you've got to take into account, or you're going to get that detail in. And finally, if you have visual content as an option, then will you make best use of that to augment what you're trying to say, because it can add the ability to help you get your message across. Similarities. Now, the similarities with a written presentation are it's informative, it's clear and concise, and it's well structured. These are the things that remain the same. So it's absolutely telling the audience what they need to know. everything relevant to the question and addressing whatever task you've been given. It has to be clear and concise. So it has to be accessible in the way you present it. So there's no misunderstanding, there's no ambiguity, and it's understandable. And to help that, it has to be well structured. It has to be well structured. It has to have a flow which takes the person through the information you're trying to get across in a way that makes sense. So those three things are very much present in ordinary academic writing, and those are the similarities that you would have in a presentation. Now, at this point, I want to talk about anxiety. This may be your first presentation at university that you're given. And therefore you may be anxious. And that is completely understandable. My point would be, I would argue that anxiety comes from, on many occasions, comes from not being as prepared as you want to be. It's a fear of, I'm not ready to do this. That's a lot of the fear. A lot of the fear will be the unknown. So you've not done something before. So whether it's the fear of the unknown or it's the fear of being unprepared, both of those can be addressed if you practice. So being prepared as you can be can alleviate the anxiety. And one of the main ways that you gain that preparedness is to practice. And how does practice help? It helps you in several ways. It helps you with the understanding of the topic. As you read the commentary that you have for your presentation, you will probably make sense of it. As you bring things together to make a commentary, you may not fully understand them, but you understand that there's points there to be made. But when you continually rehearse it, it's a learning process, and it will actually improve your understanding of the subject. It also helps you in terms of the speech itself and speaking itself, because you've gone through it before. And you know what you're going to say, and you've said it before, so you might not trip over words. Or if you have phrases that are maybe difficult, you'll have practiced them several times, and you'll just have that sense that you've done it before. And by practice I mean saying it out loud, and preferably saying it out loud in front of people, any audience, fellow students, your family, whatever that may be. It's really useful to do it in front of people. And that practice beforehand gets you very conversant with the material you're using, the commentary you're making, what it's about, and your understanding of it. And it's one of the key ways that on the day, it's not new. It's not something you've not done before. It's exactly something which you've actually done several times, so you know you can do it. You should take some confidence from it, and that should really improve the way you perform on the day. I can't overstate how important practicing is. And if you're in a group, practicing as a group and practicing the handovers within a group. Very, very important. So things to consider within the presentation of itself. We're going to talk about the things that shape your presentation. We're going to talk about the structure of a good presentation. We're going to talk about how to signpost your presentation, and we're going to talk about some key tips. That's just some things that don't fit into any other category that I think are really useful to you and you should know about before the presentation. These are the 4 things that affect a presentation and its content. So what is the topic? And you'll know that well ahead of time, what you're actually talking about. So obviously you have to read up and produce and construct a commentary to suit that topic, the question, the task that you've been given. The second thing is, how much time do you have to make the points that you need to make? And that then you have to talk about, well, how much can I get across in that amount of time, and what level of detail can I include? Who are the audience that you are talking to? Now, the audience is both academic, it's the students. So there may be a tutor watching you who's going to mark you, but there are also students watching. And interestingly, the point of a presentation is actually to give it the opportunity for students to get across what they understand about a subject to other students. So this presentation is actually very beneficial to the students who are watching. So it's almost like another, I wouldn't say a lecture, but it's another point of information for them. So when you think about it, in some ways you are trying to give a commentary that is accessible and understandable to students. And if you do that, the tutors and lecturers will pick up on how much you get the understanding across. And if you make a persuasive commentary that is really accessible and explains in a simple way and an accessible way, perhaps sometimes quite complex things, they will appreciate that you really understand the subject yourself, and that will help your mark. And the other thing is, what is the purpose of a presentation? There are a few purposes, general purposes for a presentation. It could be to inform, it could be to persuade, to educate, or it could be to entertain. If you're informing with your presentation, then you've got to absolutely make sure that everything you're trying to get across is in it. It's definitely going to be, informing will be part of your presentation. Now, depending on the task or question, there may be an element of persuasion, that if you're given an argument or a debate, that you're actually taking one side or the other, or you're making the case for one side or one other. So in that way, you've got to contain the evidence that's going to back up or help you persuade the audience on whatever side of the argument you're on, or persuade them of whatever should be done. That sometimes a presentation at university is you're making the case for something. And if you're making the case for something, you've hopefully got enough evidence within your commentary that people agree with you, because you've made a case for it that makes sense and is rigorous and reliable. You've definitely, part of your presentation is to educate. You're educating your fellow students. So that goes without saying. So you've got to make it, clear and accessible to them. And finally, to entertain, well, yes, I would like to think that your presentation is not going to be too dry, it's not going to be too monotone, it's not going to be uninteresting. How can you capture and make it interesting? So entertaining is a part of it, and I think it's something you need to think about. Is there any way we can do something with this presentation that makes it more entertaining, that people listen because they're interested? Because you can get talks and presentations from people that are very enjoyable, very entertaining, but also inform and educate. And you get ones that merely inform and educate, but may not be the easiest to listen to. So that's an element. That's an element that good presenters are able to do. These are the essential parts when you construct a presentation that you have that will give you a much greater chance of success. So before you even start, you have to sit down and work out what is it you're trying to do and label them first. Have clear objectives. This presentation will explain, define, debate, offer explanation of this subject, that concept, this theory, this debate. And if you have clear objectives that you seek to follow, then in that way you will definitely have a clear plan of how you're going to go about it. You develop those objectives and you make them what we call operational, make them doable, and you've got to have a clear plan to do that. So once you have your objectives, you say, how are we going to achieve them? Well, we're going to do it this, this and this. Also, you have to use clear signals. There's a certain way that you guide an audience through a presentation, making sure all the time that they are with you, so that there will be additional commentary that you use that is helpful to them to understand where you are. It's part of the structure. And then you've got to communicate with your audience. I mean, that's obvious, but you'd be interesting how many people don't actually achieve that. They may say words, etc. But the communication part is that relationship, that they're with you, they're making sense of what you're saying, they're understanding it, they're learning it, and possibly they're enjoying it too. And it's also very important to be yourself, to try and relax and do it. Okay, so when it comes to structure, you tend to have a beginning where you give an overview, a middle, main ideas, arguments, the logical flow, you make links, and then the ending where you clearly conclude, thank the audience, invite questions, etc. So let's go through these. Okay, in the beginning, what you want to have is that clear introduction to your topic. Leave them in no doubt what it's about. Then give an overview of the content. In other words, we are going to be talking about these things. And then tell them in which order that is going to happen. Then give them an indication of how long it's going to take. And usually with presentations, there may be a question and answer at the end, which is a very useful thing, and it's a very useful thing to have. Question and answer gives you a chance to get more detail out. So be very prepared for the questions at the end are not an add-on thing. I think they're a very useful thing because your presentation might be quite concise. The questions at the end may be a useful thing for you to get more detail in about, because hopefully you know more than you're saying and you can give more detail to it. Could you tell us a bit, so somebody might, could you tell us a bit more about this? Could you tell us a bit more about, what do you mean when you say? And in that case you can give more detail and show that you have a deeper understanding. So it's a very useful tool, I think. So the middle, this is the main part of it. Okay, the middle. And it is just this logical progression of ideas. So from your objectives and your plan, you have already in your mind what the logical progression of what you want to say is going to come about. And then after that, it's down to you to work on and develop the key points of the presentation and get those across in the right idea. You know there will be key things to do with each part, and you have to get them across. And two really useful things in addition to your commentary or within your commentary is using examples. I would recommend this for academic writing as much as I do about, so this isn't just for presentations, but especially when you're talking about something like a theory or a concept or a model or something abstract, then if you use an example of it in practice, It was really powerful for two reasons. The first thing is an example makes something that's abstract more understandable. We work in LDC, the Learning Development Centre, and we do classes like these, and we do one-to-ones. Now, if I'm trying to explain the difference between what this class is about and what a one-to-one face-to-face meeting and the difference between them, I use chess as a kind of example or metaphor, simile, for what we're doing. In these general kind of talks, I feel we are teaching people to play chess. So we're talking about the rules, we're talking about the way it's done, we're giving them essential tools to play, to do it. In a one-to-one meeting, usually comes to us, it's like they're in the middle of a chess game, so they need specific help to deal with specific things that are going on within their game. So they have an essay or they have a report and they're at that point where they need to discuss what's the best way to go, or how do I deal with this, or what's happening in this particular situation. So the classes in these two things are quite distinct, and I think the chess metaphor for that is useful to understand both. Using visual aids, finally, they can illustrate a point and they can stimulate your thinking. So if you get it could be a chart, it could be a graph, it could be a set of figures, or it could be an image. But the image, again, can be an example to show you what's going on. So visual aids, pictures, charts, etc. can be really, really useful, but you have to make sure that they are an addition. I wouldn't use visual things as a decoration for a presentation. They have to have a function. They have to have an input, and they have to be strongly related, almost included in the commentary, than pictures just for decoration. Okay, you get to the end. You're not over yet, and you've got to build in the time to do these things because it is part of presenting. So sum up your main points that you've made. Have that reinforcement of them as takeaways. Reinforce your argument if you're making one. So if you're arguing for something, reinforce your argument, go over that again and again. Make up the key points there. It could be that you have a recommendation or recommendations that you leave with. That's the pinnacle of. So, you sum up the main points, you reinforce your arguments, and therefore your recommendation is you do the thing that you're recommending. You do this thing, you don't do this thing, whatever it may be. And then if it's been asked for, you invite your questions and you thank, and clearly conclude so that everybody knows they can get up and leave or start clapping furiously. So I want to talk about signposting. Signposting is additional commentary in a presentation that guides the person that's listening by signposting and guiding verbally what's coming up. And these are just the kind, it could be anything like this, but I'd like to give an overview of my presentation. You're literally spelling out what's happening. That's all for the introduction. Now I'm moving on. Okay, another good one that says, at this part there are two main points to consider. The first point is this, blah, 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 blah. The second point is this. And again, I will end. I'm finishing up now by emphasizing the main point. So the discussion's over. This is me finishing up. That concludes my presentation for today. These are subtle, small pieces of text that are really important in providing signposting guidance for the person that's listening. If you just have islands of information, you may lose them because they're not sure. It's simple things like saying, Another connected point of this argument is you can't discuss this point without making mentioning of this. There are all these strengths to this model. However, there are these deficits as well. Anything like that is really a good, strong signposting, language that helps take the person through your presentation, and they stick with you, and it makes sense. So yeah, so we're on to our key tips. As I've said before, don't read word for word. Well, don't read word for word, even if you have a commentary, unless you have really practiced. I would like to think that if you practice it often enough, you will only need prompt cards with a few short statements that guide you, that get you started, so that you'll maybe have 5 things you have to talk about, and you'll have 5 points on one card. And if you're kind of stuck, you look at the card and you say, oh yeah, it's this bit coming up, and you. And I wouldn't have a subject. I would actually have the first line of that part, or the intro to that part, and say the first main thing I'm going to talk about is. And when you see that, you go, I know what that is. Because if you practice something more than 2 or 3 times, you will actually start to remember what you're saying you won't need a script. Okay, you won't need a script. And a prompt card or something written, just a few notes just to guide you in case, can be really useful. But reading word for word, it's going to keep your head down. You're not going to make eye contact, etc., which I'll talk about later. Avoid jargon. So with any subject that you're talking about, I make the argument that there's a common language. There's a common language that you have to use because it's part of the subject matter. So there's certain terminology and vocabulary that is shared through academia when discussing a certain subject. You can't avoid that. Other than that, I would say keep it simple enough to be accessible at a student level. You're trying to educate other students, so that's the level I want to pitch at. Engaging with the audience is not easy, but one of the ways that you can do it, two of the main ways you can do it, eye contact. Not necessarily the easiest, but when you're looking out to the front of audience, you're acknowledging them, and anybody genuinely appreciates when the person at least sometimes looks at them or looks around the audience. It's a real engagement maker. It's really kind of builds a relationship, a rapport with the audience if you can do that, making eye contact. Now, if you actually get put off by making eye contact with people and you might freeze, the secret is just to keep your eye line above everybody's head and look straight to the back of the room. So you're not actually making contact with anybody, but you're looking in the general direction of them. So they'll be looking like, well, they're not making eye contact with me, but I'm sure they're making eye contact with somebody, and they're certainly looking roughly in my direction. But if you can, rotate your head and make contact with people. Politicians are famous for doing it. You see them when they walk up on stage, and they're like that. I don't think they're actually pointing at anybody they know, but it looks good. I may be wrong. Passion. More difficult to execute, but try and be passionate about or enthused. If passion's too strong a word, be enthused about what you're talking about. Don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to punctuate something that you're saying. Sometimes even a pause when you don't say anything can be quite powerful. So be clear. Try and modulate your voice so that you're not just saying words, that you're living the commentary you have, that you really do believe in what you're saying. That makes a huge difference when you're making a presentation. Having that clear, logical structure is essential. If you lose the people halfway through, it's not clear, then the person marking your presentation can't give you the mark because they're not sure you understand, because you're not getting across what you're talking about in a logical way. Okay. And again, as I said before, that clear conclusion, thanking the audience and inviting questions is important. So, nerves, I spoke about this early. Practice. Preparation practice. I've actually spelt practice wrong here, but I could get out of that by saying preparation is a practice you should do. So it's correct. In that way, if I use it that way, that's correct. I actually meant practice. Enunciation is really important because it gives clarity and it gives accessibility. So you really have to be quite pointed in the way you talk. Don't mumble. You know the words you're saying, you've rehearsed them several times, so there should be a clarity and a fluidity about what you're speaking. And that should come across. There should never be, I can't hear you, or I can't understand. Loud and proud. Yeah, this is really important. If you can, relax. Try and pace yourself. There's only so much. This is an important point here. You can only say so much in the time. So pick your words carefully, but don't try to pack stuff in. Don't try and speed up and talk faster and get more points in because you're rushing and you're coming to the end of it and that's the thing and you've got to say more and you're running out of time. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. You've got to pace yourself. As I said before, you've got to engage and you've got to try and be natural. That's the person you are. So be the person you are. Be natural in what you do. It's just like you're talking to friends. You're sitting down and you're having coffee with somebody and you're talking to your friends and you're trying to make points about something. That's the way you want to treat a presentation. Don't get caught up. It is a formal thing. It's an assessment. But the way I approach it, if you are more natural and relaxed, you will definitely be more engaging. So, presentations. I'm just going to sum up everything I've talked about today. Did you see what I did there? So, what shapes your topic? What shapes it? The topic you're talking about, the time you have, and the audience you're talking to. So that goes for any presentation. This is a universal advice, but you're obviously going to tailor it to what you're doing. Make sure you have a structure with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the structure within those. Remember to signpost to the audience as often as possible so they are with you all the time. You bring them with you, signpost it, they're aware, they know what's coming next. It's exactly the same as you might do in written academic work. Be yourself. Engage, be enthusiastic, be prepared to take questions. These are some of the useful tips I also went across with you that can make the difference in a presentation. But by far, the thing that's going to improve all of this is practicing it, speaking it out loud, and doing so in front of other people. I want to thank you for that today. I would say, does anyone have any questions? But this is a video, so even if you did, I couldn't answer you. I hope that has been of use to you. Remember, I work in the LDC. You'll be able to get us on the website if you want to make a one-to-one to talk about a presentation or anything more detail. Thanks very much for your time.